Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're doing great today. Today we're going to talk about a concept that is something that I explore at more depth in my new book, which is coming out, soon, which will be the sequel to my book, The Ecstatic Soul. And this concept is the concept of severance. So I want to give you a little preview what it's like, and be aware that I explore it more fully in my book. Speaking of books, my book will be a sequel to The Ecstatic Soul. Deepest investigation of the INFJ currently available. Get a copy if you haven't yet. The link is below. So is the link to my book, The Infinite Castle, which is an exploration of alienation. It's a novel. There's Kafka, there's Dostoevsky, there's Murakami and others in it. And rumor has it the main character is an INFJ, so support me, get it. It's a very nice product. You can also support me on Patreon. Help me massively. Thank you so much to my supporters. That's the #1 link there, anywhere from $3 a month. So what is severance? If you're familiar with the catalog of concepts that I have deployed before in the Ecstatic Soul, you're familiar with alienation, you're familiar with haziness, you're familiar with prescience, you're familiar with disembodiment. So what is severance? Severance is what you could describe as a higher order kind of phenomenal experience that is typical of INFJ consciousness. But it tends to be the lot of not necessarily all INFJs. It's what I would describe severance as an experience, as part of the existential constitution of a yearning INFJ. And we could describe this, a yearning INFJ, as an INFJ who is seeking to really recover the spiritual within himself or herself. So if you want a fuller elaboration of why it is my belief, and that's also a thesis in my new book, that that the spiritual, that INFJs are fundamentally spiritual beings, according to also a reinterpretation of the NI function. You can check the video that I released last weekend in relation to why all INFJs are spiritual. And I think that recovering the spiritual within yourself is key, and which is also an appreciation and engagement with the sacred in the world, is key to the liberation of INFJ potential and what I refer to as the infinite attitude. I think that if you're a yearning INFJ who seeks that, who seeks to reach a fuller completion of being, leading ultimately in very practical terms to a fuller, more meaningful and more purposeful existence, higher quality life in some sense, you're going to inevitably experience severance. And that doesn't sound very reassuring, right? It doesn't sound very reassuring because, well, severance is like, like there's a sense taken apart in some way. So what does that exactly mean, and why is that inevitably going to take place? How can we better describe it? So in order to understand severance, we need to understand another phenomenon, which is not the lot of only specifically yearning INFJs, spiritually yearning INFJs, but all INFJs. And this concept is in some sense an elaboration of alienation. Alienation is the basic sense of being alienated from the external reality. But what this concretely means is that when you're dealing with external reality, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with things, you're dealing with objects, you're dealing with institutions, you're dealing with, everything that relates to what's outside yourself. Alienation is basic, but the fact remains that you have to face an external world. You have to face everyday reality, the everydayness of banal things and less banal things that, construct and compose your everyday. You're going to experience, you do experience a sense of distance from that reality. You're in that reality, you're embodied, you are engaged, you're absorbed in that reality, in that everyday activity. But through this sense of alienation, you're also distant from it, which means that there is a certain sense of withdrawal that you have to fight with, that you have to, if you like, propitiate, you have to pacify that sense. Which is also, by the way, one of the reasons why sometimes INFJs, and I've mentioned this before in matters of relationships and love, Sometimes an INFJ can seem like they're somewhere else, like they are not completely engaged with the person that they're with, and that can give them, or the other person, the sense that they're not interested, that they are absent-minded, they're absent. Often it's just distance. It's a sense that the INFJ is here, but they're also somewhere else. They're somewhere that's much more internal, that's much more interior to their being, whether it be a more or less unconscious contemplation of eternal archetypes or something else. So there is this primordial sense of distance. There is distance there, and Heidegger is someone who captured that notion very well, and there's a case that could be made that Heidegger was INFJ. INTJ is also a very strong possibility for Heidegger, but NI dominance is what we're mostly interested in here, so the two types could be concerned with it. Now, the sense of distance is always going to be there, but the more an INFJ seeks to adapt to the external world, external reality, the demands of everyday life, in some sense, the more they're going to try to repress the sense of distance, okay? And so INFJs who might consider themselves extremely adapted to the demands, which I actually call adapted submissive, in the sense that they don't even ask themselves the question, what is it that I have to sacrifice or compromise in order to achieve adaptation, getting on with other people and so on? Do I not forget myself potentially as an INFJ? Do I not forget myself in terms of the potentialities of my being by repressing my distance? And that's also refers back to this key notion in the Ecstatic Soul, where I said alienation is something that we should seek to transcend, but it's not something that we should seek to exercise. It's part of our being, it's part of the makeup of our consciousness. So we should not try to exercise it, but transcending it is a goal that's worthwhile. And the transcendence of that state of alienation does take place through the external world, but it should not necessarily or mean that distance ought to be completely repressed. It's part of the INFJ experience to experience distance, and the cultivation of your spiritual side, since it resides in a certain way in the cultivation of NI's metaphorical approach to finding new meanings through which to experience and describe reality. So here we're back to what I call the INFJ as a meaning-making being. In a sense, the encounter with the sacred is going to take place through a sense of distance, because the sacred is not something that you are absent-mindedly engaged in, absorbed in the way that you're absorbed in the everyday activities of your everyday life. The sacred involves this distance. Distance is not the same as a sort of reflective move where you stop looking at a sacred object, you know, just as something that you engage with, something that you try to conceptualize. That's something that you do in science, but it's not the domain of the sacred. The domain of the sacred is much more something like reverence. It's much more something like you let something be, right, in the fullness of its being. But it involves a certain sense of distance, of an awareness that you're not part of that thing, part of that. That thing has a meaning in and of itself and expresses itself by itself and through itself. So if you cultivate that sacred aspect of the world, you cultivate yourself, you also cultivate inevitably your distance. So you have to, in some way, in order to be a fully functional INFJ who's not completely adaptive submissive, but also not solipsistically in your own world, which are two options of being, modes of being for INFJs, what you're going to want to be is the third way, the yearning INFJ, the spiritualized INFJ, who's able to engage with everyday activities, be functional, but with an appreciation for the sacred. And that's where severance comes into the picture. Because severance is the idea that you are at one and the same time engaging and paying tribute to the importance of ordinary life and ordinary circumstances and everyday activities, practice, absorbed coping, as Charles Taylor might say, but also appreciating and engaging with what's sacred and does not belong to the domain of the everyday, of everyday activity, of the banal everydayness of existence, which has to be respected. But there is something on top of it, which is the domain of the sacred, the domain of meanings, and the INFJ as a meaning-making being becomes almost automatically distant from everyday reality when they engage in this mode, and this mode is important. So you have distance and absorbed coping all at once, and both are important, but they can't be reconciled. And the fact that they can't be reconciled means severance. You have a being that's split apart into two modes: the mode of coping in the world, engaging in practical activities, and you have the mode of being distanced out of a sense of spiritually engaging with the world of meanings. How do you make the two coexist? It's an everyday struggle, in a way. I want to say it's an everyday challenge. It's an everyday task. How to cultivate this severance is key to being a fulfilled INFJ, right? It's to how you manage to make the two coexist. And in fact, the INFJs are in some sense the most enlightened, the most integrated, the most individuated, often have a very interesting sense of humor that they let others enjoy, not just privately, but when whoever engages with them. It's often an interesting mix of, you can never know if the INFJ is completely serious or not. And the humor is often kind of pained, but also full of joy. It's very strange, right? It's almost like finding joy and humor at the absurdity of existence, especially in terms of its everyday absorbed coping, conflicting with the incredible meaningfulness of existence from the point of view of a distant reverence for the sacred. Conflict between the two is also a source of great, unbelievably profound humor for those INFJs who can cultivate that. You can often see it through their humor. It's something that I say in the book as well. So the experience of severance is real, and often if you experience severance and know how to cultivate it, it's a sign that you're on the path to individuation, or what I call now the infinite attitude. Okay, let me know in the comments what you think, and if you want to know more, keep updated as regards the release of the new book. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.